This is not a tutorial. I want to provide you with a tool that will help you break out of your reliance on tutorials. Hello. Tutorials are a great resource, but a lot of new developers get stuck in what we call tutorial hell, a state of utter dependency on hand-holding from scruffy-looking online personalities like me. From my experience as a teacher and as a learner, we can place the tutorial damned on one of 3 points on a little continuum. On one side, we have a lack of confidence. You actually can make stuff, but you've spent so long with the training wheels on that you don't know you can just take them off. Make and finish a game, something small, then make something bigger. Make it without following a big tutorial, but you can always look stuff up. Documentation, small tips, small tutorials, etc. That's okay, we all do that. This video might be useful to you. It might not. On the other side are people with a complete lack of technical skills. In this case, you simply don't know how to do the basic building blocks of what you need to do. This is okay. We've all been beginners. We all start somewhere. It's at this point where you can benefit the most from tutorials, I think. However, you might be doing the wrong tutorial content. As you learn, ask yourself, am I just copying code? Or could I explain what I'm doing with each line? If not, you might need to find simpler content. Tutorials are great for getting the lay of the land and learning new technologies, but you need to be doing content of an appropriate level. If you barely understand the syntax of your language or 3D geometry or programming logic in general, you won't get anything from that great 20-hour-long hex terrain generation tutorial or whatever. Tutorials make it very easy to fall into this dangerous pattern. If this is you, seek material that is more focused on the fundamentals of your language or engine and slow down. For every line of code, stop and try to figure out why it's being written and what it does. Look up documentation and targeted lessons on code syntax and engine features, or take a course like Harvard's free online CS50. Stop watching mega tutorials that build whole games and focus on learning the fundamentals of your language, of your engine, and programming in general. The middle, though, is what I want to focus on today. Here, the problem is that learners don't understand how to break ideas down from big things into actionable parts. In this case, you understand how to code, you know the syntax of your language, and you can move sprites on screen, do basic math, instantiate stuff. But when you go to make your game, you open up your engine and you stare at a blank script file. You open up YouTube and type in best tutorial for Pigeon Romance Simulator, and you just follow along. And this puts you in a very limited space because you can only make a game when someone is holding your hand through every step. You need to learn how to break ideas down to smaller and smaller pieces until they are something you can just make. Let's face it, your big idea and maybe even your smallest ideas are impossibly large projects. You want to move an entire mountain from over here to over there, and you stand at the foot of that mountain and you look up, and in its totality, moving it is an impossibility. But you decide to move it one shovelful at a time, and that's doable. It still might take a lot of time, but you can imagine how each shovelful moves you toward accomplishing your goal. I recommend choosing a fairly small mountain to start with. As you get more experience, get a bigger team, or get funding, you can tackle a bigger one. To this end, I want to introduce you to a rough and informal process that I use, more or less, to get from a big idea to a list of code-level tasks. The idea is extremely simple. We take an idea, and then we decompose it into all of the things we need to make that idea work. And it can go from being fairly conceptual, like the whole game, to quite technical and concrete, like basically pseudocode, where you're saying, move the player to the left or right, that kind of thing. The output then is a list of not quite developer tasks, but possibly developer tasks, possibly pseudocode, possibly even just notes for yourself to research something. You don't have to do anything specifically for this, but the idea is to structure your game in such a way that you kind of understand the relationship between the big idea and these small component parts. And then you can just start working on those small component parts. You don't need someone to hold your hand. You can just start building. And the assumptions you make during this process could be wrong, but it's still valuable because you're going to have some structure. Maybe you think you can do something one way, you can't. You've still thought about it, and you can still use that information to make a better decision later. Anyways, let's get started with a little example. The design I'm going to use for this very simple game is just going to be a mock-up I put together with some candy assets. Often you'll actually have a game design document with actually written stuff, but I think a game this simple is, I don't know, nice to use just a mock-up for. There is kind of an element to design in this too, because you might hit questions that your designers have not answered yet, and you might have to ask them to specify, or ask yourself if you're designing your own game. But yeah, from a mock-up like this, we can start decomposing it into our first level of questions here. So I'm going to pull off each type of thing in this world here. So we've got player ship, we've got the player projectiles, we've got power-ups, enemy projectiles, enemy ships, we've got score, we've got player lives, and we've got asteroids. From here, we can start thinking about how we can start implementing each of these kinds of things and start asking deeper and more technical questions. So I'm really only going to go deep into the player ship in this video, but I encourage you to try to figure out what the other ones could have in them. So for the player ship, we can start listing out the things we need to make that work. We need to show a sprite. We need to move it left to right. We need to have it fire a weapon. We need to have it pick up power-ups. We need to have it collide with enemy fire and asteroids. We need to have it lose life on hit. And we need to have it blow up when you're out of life and do a game over, I guess. At this level, we still need some more, I think. These are very high level. They are kind of more specified, but we do want to get deeper here. So let's look at each of these again in turn and go deeper in. So we'll start with show sprite here. So it depends on what engine you're using, but in Godot, which I use mostly, you can just pass a PNG to a sprite node. If you don't know that, that's okay, but you probably can guess you can do something like that, and maybe just make a note like that. Also, you'll probably want to instantiate this thing in your world somehow. Great, let's go to movement. For movement, we know we need to accept player input. I don't think we need to be that much more descriptive than that for this. If the game had really complex input, we might want to, but if it's just, this is going to be arrow keys, we don't need to really talk about that in depth. We can figure that out when we're coding. Well, what about how we're going to move? Are we going to move just like a straight amount, or do we want to use like velocity and inertia? So if we want to use velocity, well, what if you don't know how to set up velocity in a game? This is where you might want to put a note for yourself to research it. You could look up a tutorial, or you could look up some documentation or something like that so that you can research and do this. I think it's totally okay to have some things in here where you just don't know how to do it, but know there's a way to do it. And you make a note of yourself to do some research and figure it out. Another thing we can do is clamp to play area. Again, this is not exhaustive, but it is a list of things we can just start working on to get this going. Let's move on to firing the weapon. Again, we need to accept some player input. Again, I'm not going to get into detail unless this becomes something complex. We can just assume there's going to be a fire button. What about instantiating a bullet? Well, that sounds like it's more complex, and we should probably drill down on that at some point. Then we're going to need to propel that bullet in a direction. Again, that sounds like it's got some more components, so we'll mark that as something we want to drill down onto further. Then we want to figure out collision with the bullets. And again, that might be something we want more information about later. So let's go back up here and we can go a bit deeper into some of these. So for instantiating a bullet, well, what bullet? Are there going to be multiple kinds of projectiles in this, or just one? Maybe the power-ups define them, so we have to figure that out. We probably need to store the bullet default scene or prefab or whatever on the player. We probably also need to store the current power-up if that is providing a bullet too. And then what direction should we propel the bullet in? We could just do up. I think that's a good start for a default, but we could always define something else with our power-ups. Maybe make a note of that as something you can explore or talk to your designers about. Now, let's look at bullet collision with a hurtable. So we need to make sure things have colliders. Most of our engines have such a thing, and you probably have played with them before. We need to store damage values, unless it's just one hit kill for everything. And hurtables need to have a common interface probably, or a function or a signal to be able to accept damage. Again, that probably depends on the engine you're working in. If you're working in GDScript like I do, we do not have interfaces, so we have to make do with signals and duck typing. Again, at this point, we're starting to get into specifics that might be different between engines, so that's fine, but most of this really is fairly engine agnostic, at the higher level at least. We can get back to some of these other tasks at this level, and you can see how the design of this is really fractal. Like, we have these ideas that go into smaller ideas, that go into smaller ideas, that go into kind of implementation details, that go into like more specific implementation details. And you could go many levels deep with a complicated project, and I think it would be helpful for speccing out something that you are kind of unsure about. Cool, moving forward here. Or we can look at power-ups here. So we're gonna have to store them somewhere, probably as resources if you're using Godot, scriptable objects, or whatever, but you may want to look into that. Maybe you need to research it, make a note of that. You should have player collision to check if you're colliding with a power-up, and if it is, replace it with your current one. And power-ups need to have some sort of function that applies them to players. Again, you could probably use an interface or duck typing or something for this. Great, moving on. We can do some sort of collision, we think. Like, there's got to be some sort of collision to figure out if you're hitting a enemy laser or hitting an asteroid or whatever. And blowing up hazards on impact, I guess it'd be fun. And it also saves us some annoyance if things do not persist after they damage you. And then finally, we can lose life on hit. I've got a life bar, or at least lives at the top. And then we need to send a signal if the game is over that will create a game over screen and let you restart. And probably also stop the game simulation. You could keep it running, it'll look fun. That's up to you. Anyways, so that's kind of how I would spec out the ship. And you can see that's just one small part of this, but we've got a lot of details now that we can now use to start building that. And then we could go into any of these other areas here and start speccing that out. There's going to be some duplicate values because we have already talked a bit about power-ups, we've talked a bit about projectiles, that kind of thing, but that's okay. Really the idea is you just need some structure to figure out where to start making these things. I'm not gonna finish this up. I just wanted to kind of show you how you could do it, but you could imagine how each of these could become fractally deep, layer by layer, to kind of spec out at least the bones of a game. And then there's always going to be things you need to figure out later, things that you did not think of. And again, if you're brand new to this, it's not going to be easy, and you're going to make mistakes, but that's okay. What I want you to do is just start making stuff and making those mistakes, because that's going to be how you learn. Anyways, so this is a tool that I like. You can adapt it however you want. You could do it on paper, you could do it however you want. But the only thing that is important is that you just break down big ideas into smaller ones until they're things you can actually code. All right, I hope you can see how that could be a pretty useful tool for you. Again, don't beat yourself up about not knowing everything. The main thing about this is you just need to try to get out some structure so that you can start doing the things you do know how to do. And also knowing what you don't know specifically, so you can look that stuff up in a targeted manner. When I say like getting out of tutorial hell or whatever, it doesn't mean never looking up documentation again, never looking at a tutorial. It means just breaking the dependency on it. And I think that breaking the dependency on the structural handholding is one of the last things people need to do before they're ready to actually totally break out of it. This is a tool that does that, I think. Adapt it to your needs. I'm not, a prophet. I'm just a hobbyist game developer who also has a software job. Please make a game. Games are good. Games are art, and art makes life worth living. All right. Goodbye.